6 wealthy executives surrounded her at the edge of the yacht, their laughter echoing across open water. "Time for your initiation," one sneered as they forced her toward the rail. They assumed throwing her overboard miles from shore would leave her panicked, desperate, begging. It was their tradition, humiliating the help for entertainment. But when she hit the water, something unexpected happened. Instead of flailing, she assessed the situation with military precision. Instead of swimming toward the yacht, she moved purposefully away. They had just made the worst mistake of their privileged lives. This Navy SEAL didn't fear the ocean. She commanded it. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you connect with stories of underestimated people revealing their extraordinary capabilities, we invite you to subscribe and join our community. The Maine coastline shimmered in late summer splendor as the 120-foot yacht Sovereign Privilege cut through the Atlantic waters. Its gleaming white hull and polished brass fixtures reflected wealth that most coastal residents would never touch in a lifetime. On the stern deck, Elouane Travail stood with perfect posture, despite the gentle roll of the waves, her weathered hands resting lightly on the navigation charts spread before her. "As I was explaining," she continued, her voice calm despite being interrupted 3 times already. "The currents off Penobscot Bay can be unpredictable this time of year. If we're planning to anchor overnight at—" "Sweetheart, I've been sailing since prep school," Brexley Harrington cut in, not bothering to look up from his phone. His Rolex caught the sunlight as he dismissed her with a wave. "We don't need the full tourist lecture." Elouane registered the interruption without changing her expression. "Of course, Mr. Harrington. I'm just following charter protocol." At 42, Brexley managed $8 billion in assets but couldn't manage basic courtesy. His carefully tousled hair and casual Vineyard Vines attire were calculated to suggest he'd been born on a sailboat rather than simply buying his way onto them. Behind him, Juliana Remington snickered, her 4th mimosa balanced precariously in manicured fingers. "Brez, be nice," she stage whispered loud enough for Elouane to hear. "She probably memorized that speech for us. Probably practiced in front of her mirror in that charming little, what would you call it, apartment, shack?" Thackeray Whittington added, his patrician features arranged in what he considered a benevolent smile. At 45, he was the oldest of the group, with an inheritance that had purchased generations of unearned confidence. The other 3 executives, Prescott, Rafferty, and Westfield, chuckled dutifully, completing the chorus of entitlement that had begun with mimosas at 9 a.m. and would likely end with single malts under the stars. Elouane quietly gathered her charts. "I'll be forward if you need. Anything. We should reach our first anchorage in about 3 hours." As she moved away, she caught Thackeray's commentary. "Did you see those deck shoes? I don't think LL Bean even makes those anymore." "Probably couldn't afford to replace them," Brexley replied. "These local hires can barely make rent." Elouane continued forward, giving no indication she'd heard them. Her worn canvas shoes moved silently across the teak decking as she made her way to the bow. There, shielded from their view, she checked her watch, a simple but surprisingly robust digital model, and studied the horizon with eyes that noted far more than casual observers would suspect. A light breeze lifted the sleeve of her simple navy polo shirt, briefly revealing a jagged scar on her shoulder before she adjusted the fabric. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Glancing at the screen, she saw a message addressed to Lieutenant Commander before quickly stowing it away and returning her attention to the sea. By midday, the yacht had made excellent progress up the coast. The weather remained cooperative, though Elouane had noted the barometric pressure dropping slightly, something she kept to herself for now. Below deck, the charter's chef prepared an elaborate lunch while the executives lounged on the upper deck, drinking steadily. "So, Elouane," Juliana called out, deliberately mispronouncing her name. "That's quite an unusual name. Family tradition?" Elouane approached with professional detachment. "Cornish origin. It means elm tree." "How quaint," Juliana replied, exchanging glances with Brexley. "And what brings someone with such a poetic name to boat tours?" The pause was deliberate, reducing Elouane's profession to something trivial. "I've always been comfortable on the water," Elouane answered simply. "But surely you had bigger dreams?" Thackeray pressed, swirling his gin and tonic. "College aspirations? Career goals beyond showing rich people which end of the boat is which?" Prescott snorted into his drink while Rafferty and Westfield exchanged amused glances. "The maritime industry suits me," Elowen replied. Something in her tone, a quiet certainty, momentarily gave Thackeray pause, but the alcohol quickly washed away the brief moment of perception. "Well, we're glad to have you aboard," Brexley said with exaggerated graciousness, "especially since the charter company promised us someone with, what was it? Exceptional qualifications." He made air quotes, inspiring another round of laughter. A glass shattered on the deck as Westfield lost his grip. Instantly, Elowen's stance shifted. Weight redistributed, hands positioned for action, eyes scanning for threat assessment, before she smoothly transitioned back to her previous posture. The micro-adjustment happened so quickly that only Rafferty noticed something odd, his brow furrowing briefly before Brexley's loud complaints about the broken glass distracted him. "I'll clean that up," Elowen said, already, moving to collect the larger shards. "While you're at it," Brexley called after her, "we're going to need another round. Playing serving girl wasn't in your job description, but you don't mind, right?" Elowen nodded once, her face revealing nothing, as she disposed of the broken glass with efficient movements that suggested significant upper body strength, despite her lean frame. By late afternoon, the drinking had intensified, along with the casual cruelty. The yacht had traveled significantly offshore, the coastline now a distant smudge on the horizon. Elowen had quietly adjusted their course twice, accounting for the weather system she'd been tracking on her phone when the group wasn't watching. "I think we should consider heading back toward the coastline," she suggested during a rare moment when Brexley seemed marginally receptive. "There's a system moving in that could make for an uncomfortable night this far out." Brexley's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting I change my plans because you're worried about a little chop? I sailed through a nor'easter at Dartmouth. This is nothing." "I'm simply making a recommendation based on the forecast," Elowen replied evenly. "Well, your recommendation is noted and ignored," Brexley said, earning appreciative laughter from his cohort. "We're exactly where we want to be. In fact, it's the perfect place for our little tradition." Something in his tone put Elowen on alert, though her expression remained neutral. "What tradition might that be?" she asked. Juliana smiled with artificial sweetness. "Oh, we always do a little initiation for new staff. Nothing serious, just a bit of fun." "Right," Thackeray added. "Last year we had this steward from Bulgaria, made him recite poetry while standing on the bowsprit, nearly wet himself." The memory prompted cruel laughter. "I appreciate the offer," Elowen said carefully, "but I should maintain focus on navigation and safety." "Oh, come on," Brexley stood, his considerable height allowing him to loom over her. "Don't be such a bore. Everyone participates. It's mandatory fun." The others had formed a loose semicircle around her, drinks in hand, but eyes suddenly sharper with anticipation. Elowen noted their positions, the distance to the rails, the exact location of life-saving equipment. Her calculations were automatic, a professional habit she'd never lost. "What exactly did you have in mind?" she asked, buying time as she assessed the deteriorating situation. Brexley grinned, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Just a little swim, nothing a qualified sailing instructor can't handle. Without proper safety equipment and this far offshore, swimming wouldn't be advisable," Elowen said, her tone shifting subtly from suggestion to warning. "Oh, listen to Miss Safety Patrol," Juliana mocked. "Are you scared of a little water? I thought that was your element." "The water temperature is approximately 62 degrees, Elowen stated factually. "Sustained exposure leads to hypothermia in under an hour." "We're not talking about sustained exposure," Thackeray said, his voice carrying the dangerous edge of the privileged when challenged. "Just a quick dip to show you're a good sport." Elowen's eyes moved from face to face, recognizing the ugliness of mob mentality forming. These people were used to getting their way, to treating others as entertainment rather than equals. She had encountered this type before, though usually in different contexts. "I must decline," she said firmly, "and I strongly suggest we alter course toward shore before—" She didn't finish the sentence. Brexley nodded once, and Prescott and Rafferty moved with surprising speed, grabbing her arms from behind. Their grip was tight but amateurish. She could have broken free with minimal effort, but chose to remain restrained for the moment. "Here's the situation," Brexley said, leaning close enough that she could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath. This is happening. You can either play along and keep your job, or resist and find yourself explaining to the charter company why you failed to provide appropriate customer service. You should reconsider, Elowen said quietly. And you should learn your place, Brexley replied, his mask of civility completely dropped. With surprising strength for someone who spent his days behind a trading desk, Brexley grabbed her shoulders while the others maintained their hold on her arms. They forced her toward the stern, her struggles appearing futile to their eyes. "Wait," Juliana suddenly said, reaching for Elowen's pocket. "Let's hold her phone. Wouldn't want it getting wet." She removed the device with a smirk, tossing it onto a cushioned seat. "On three," Thackeray called out gleefully. "1, 2, 3. They heaved Elowen over the rail. For a fraction of a second, she was suspended above the churning Atlantic waters, her expression finally changing, not to fear, but to something closer to tactical assessment. She hit the water with perfect form, minimizing splash and impact. When she surfaced moments later, there was no panic, no frantic splashing or calls for help. Instead, she treaded water with textbook efficiency, her breathing controlled as she took stock of her situation. "Swim back to the boat if you want to get paid," Brexley shouted, his laughter echoed by the others as the yacht continued moving forward, the distance between them and Elowen growing with each passing second. "Don't worry, we'll circle back once you've had a good workout," Thackeray added, raising his glass in mocking salute. Aboard the yacht, only Rafferty showed a flicker of concern. "We are going back, right? She's pretty far out now." "Of course," Brexley assured him, though his eyes held a meanness that suggested otherwise. Eventually, from the water, Elowen watched the yacht continuing its path away from her. Rather than chasing after it in desperation, as they clearly expected, she remained where she was, her mind calculating distance, currents, temperature, and the rapidly changing weather conditions. She took note of the darkening clouds on the western horizon, confirming what her earlier observations had suggested. Instead of following the yacht, she began swimming with powerful, measured strokes in a different direction entirely. Her form was nothing like that of a casual swimmer, or even a collegiate athlete. It was something else entirely, the mechanical precision of someone whose life had depended on aquatic proficiency in far more dangerous waters than these. Aboard the Sovereign Privilege, the laughter began to falter as they watched her swimming away from the vessel rather than toward it. "What the hell is she doing?" Juliana asked, the first trace of uncertainty in her voice. "Probably heading toward shore," Westfield suggested, though they all knew the coast was miles beyond the horizon. "She'll turn around," Brexley said with false confidence. "She's just trying to scare us." But as Elowen's figure grew smaller in the distance, swimming with unwavering purpose in the wrong direction, the first genuine flicker of doubt crossed his face. 3 hours later, the atmosphere aboard the Sovereign Privilege had transformed entirely. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the increasingly nervous faces of the 6 executives. The playful breeze of morning had evolved into gusting winds that drove whitecaps across the surface of the Atlantic. The distant smudge of coastline had disappeared completely behind a bank of encroaching fog. "Try it again," Brexley demanded, hovering over Prescott, who was attempting to restart the yacht's engine for the 20th time. "It's not working," Prescott replied, frustration evident in his voice. "Something's wrong with the fuel system. It's like it was deliberately—" "Don't be ridiculous," Brexley cut him off. "Luxury yachts don't just die in the middle of the ocean. Keep trying." Thackeray emerged from the communications cabin, his usual composure noticeably frayed. "Radio's still not functioning, and there's no cell service out here." "What about the satellite phone?" Juliana asked, her earlier mockery replaced by poorly concealed fear. "Missing?" Thackeray replied tightly. "I can't find it anywhere." Rafferty stood at the rail, scanning the darkening waters with mounting concern. "We need to face facts. We threw a woman overboard, miles offshore, and now we're stranded. If something happens to her—" "Nothing's going to happen to her," Brexley insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "She's a sailing instructor. She knows these waters." "Then why did she swim away from the boat?" Westfield asked, the question they'd all been avoiding for hours. A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by the increasing whine of the wind through the rigging. The barometer mounted in the cockpit showed a precipitous drop in pressure, a warning sign that even these amateur sailors couldn't ignore. We need to prepare for the storm, Thackeray finally said. Secure anything loose, check the life rafts, find the emergency supplies. I still don't understand why she'd swim away, Juliana repeated, hugging herself against the dropping temperature. It doesn't make any sense unless… Unless what? Rafferty prompted. Unless she knew something we didn't, Juliana finished quietly. As if summoned by her words, a massive wave struck the yacht broadside, sending crystal glasses and expensive electronics crashing to the deck. The boat heeled alarmingly before righting itself, leaving the passengers clinging to whatever handholds they could find. That's impossible, Brexley said, but his trademark arrogance had been replaced by rising panic. She couldn't have known this was coming. I think there's a lot she knew that we didn't, Rafferty replied, looking genuinely shaken. Did you see how she hit the water? That wasn't a panic dive. That was military precision. Before anyone could respond, a mechanized whine cut through the darkness, a sound that didn't belong to their disabled vessel. Westfield grabbed high-powered binoculars from the navigation station and trained them on the source. There's something coming, he announced. Small craft, moving fast despite the waves. Coast Guard? Thackeray asked hopefully. Westfield adjusted the focus. No, smaller. Looks like it can't be. What? Brexley demanded. It looks like a modified tactical watercraft, military grade. The small vessel approached with remarkable speed, somehow maintaining stability in conditions that would have capsized most civilian boats of similar size. As it drew alongside the yacht, the group gathered at the rail, peering down with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The lone figure aboard the craft secured it expertly to the yacht with a carbon fiber grappling system, then began climbing the ladder to the main deck with fluid efficiency. The person wore what appeared to be a specialized wetsuit with tactical attachments, face obscured by the fading light. As the figure stepped onto the deck, reaching up to remove the protective headgear, 6 jaws dropped in unified shock. Elouan Travail stood before them, not drowned, not hypothermic, not even particularly winded. Her hair was pulled back in a tight braid, revealing features that somehow looked entirely different than they had hours earlier. The pleasant neutrality had been replaced by focused intensity, the accommodating posture transformed into a commanding presence. Sovereign privilege, this vessel is now under emergency protocol, she announced in a voice that carried military authority. You will follow my instructions without question if you want to survive the next 12 hours. What the hell is this? Brexley blustered, stepping forward aggressively despite the circumstances. Where did you… His advance was halted by a simple raised hand and a look that stopped him more effectively than physical restraint. Mr. Harrington, your yacht is disabled, communications are compromised, and you're heading into a Category 2 storm system without functioning navigation equipment. This is not the time for your particular brand of entitlement. Who are you? Juliana whispered, asking the question they were all thinking. Elouan assessed them for a moment before responding. Lieutenant Commander Elouan Travail, United States Navy, Naval Special Warfare Command. Currently on medical rehabilitation assignment following extraction of shrapnel from my left shoulder and lung, courtesy of an operation I can't discuss in non-classified settings. She reached into her tactical vest and removed a military ID that confirmed everything she'd just stated. You're a Navy SEAL, Rafferty stated, his voice filled with disbelief. Women can't be SEALs, Brexley objected automatically, clinging to his last shred of perceived superiority. Officially, you're correct, Elouan acknowledged. Unofficially, Naval Special Warfare has had women in combat roles for years. We just operate under different administrative classifications. Now, does anyone else want to debate my credentials, or can we focus on keeping this overpriced bathtub afloat through the squall that's about to hit? A tremendous crack of thunder punctuated her question. As the leading edge of the storm system arrived, rain began pelting the deck in horizontal sheets driven by wind that had doubled in intensity within minutes. You swam away from us, Thackeray said, still struggling to comprehend the situation. Why? Because I placed an emergency beacon on the eastern marker buoy 2 miles from where you threw me overboard, Elouan explained briskly while moving to secure loose equipment. Standard protocol when working with high-risk clients. The tactical response craft was deployed from a support vessel within 20 minutes of activation. High-risk clients? Westfield repeated. You have quite a reputation among charter services, Elouan replied, not bothering to soften the truth. 3 companies have blacklisted your group after previous traditions left staff stranded or injured. When you booked with Atlantic Elite Charters, the owner, a retired SEAL who served under my command, recognized your names and contacted me. This was a setup, Brexley realized, his face flushing with anger. You were testing us? And you failed spectacularly, Elowen confirmed without emotion. Now, grab those line-securing clamps and help me lash down the tender before we lose it overboard. For a moment, it seemed Brexley might refuse out of pure obstinacy, but another violent wave crashed over the bow, nearly sweeping Juliana off her feet, and reality finally penetrated his lifelong bubble of privilege. Over the next 2 hours, the storm intensified to near hurricane-force conditions. The yacht pitched and rolled dangerously, taking on water faster than its pumps could expel it. Through it all, Elowen directed the group with calm efficiency, assigning tasks based on quick assessments of their capabilities rather than their corporate titles. Thackeray, who had spent enough time on boats to have some practical knowledge, worked alongside her securing hatches and reinforcing vulnerable areas. Juliana, initially paralyzed by fear, found purpose in monitoring the pumps under Elowen's direct instruction. Even Brexley, after a failed attempt to reassert control, had nearly sent Prescott overboard, grudgingly accepted his role in the emergency hierarchy. During a brief lull in the wind, Rafferty approached Elowen as she expertly spliced a broken control cable. "The engine sabotage," he said quietly. "Was that you?" "A temporary fuel line interruption," she corrected, her hands never pausing in their work. "Designed to activate 3 hours after deployment, easily repairable once the assessment was complete." "Assessment of what?" "Character," she replied simply. "How people behave when they think there are no consequences reveals who they truly are." Before he could respond, a massive rogue wave struck the yacht broadside. The vessel heeled drastically, nearly capsizing before slowly righting itself. Loose objects became projectiles in the violence of the motion. A heavy equipment case broke free from its mounting, hurtling directly toward where Brexley was struggling to maintain his footing. Without hesitation, Elowen launched herself across the tilting deck, shoving Brexley clear of the impact zone. The case struck her instead, tearing her tactical shirt and sending her crashing against the navigation console. For a moment, she remained motionless, and genuine fear flashed across 6 faces that had sneered at her hours earlier. Then, with deliberate focus, Elowen pushed herself upright, revealing an extensive network of scars across her torso and left shoulder, evidence of wounds far more serious than anything this pampered group had ever witnessed. "Commander, you're injured," Thackeray said, using her title for the first time. "Noted," she replied tersely, pressing a hand against her reopened shoulder wound. "But unless you've suddenly developed the skills to navigate us through this system, I suggest we keep moving." As she turned to check the emergency beacon, Brexley stared at the blood seeping through her fingers, blood spilled protecting someone who had tried to harm her hours earlier. "Why did you do that?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Why save me after what we did?" Elowen secured the beacon before answering. "Because that's the job. We don't get to choose who's worth saving." The simple statement hung in the air between them, more damning than any accusation could have been. As the night wore on, the executives found themselves transformed from masters of their domain to helpless participants in a battle against nature, a battle in which their wealth, titles, and connections meant absolutely nothing. Only Elowen's expertise stood between them and disaster. Prescott, the youngest of the group at 36, worked alongside her to repair the emergency radio, following her instructions with growing respect. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked as she deftly rewired a corroded connection. "Bud S training is just the beginning," she replied, referring to the notoriously brutal Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL course. After that comes specialized training in everything from emergency medicine to electrical engineering. We train to function in environments where a failure means death. "And we threw you into the ocean for fun," he said quietly, the enormity of their misjudgment finally sinking in. Elowen didn't respond directly. Instead, she tested the radio connection, receiving only static in return. "Storm's interfering with transmission. We'll try again when the front passes." On the lower deck, Juliana and Westfield worked to seal a leak that was allowing seawater to breach the hull near the stern. Following Elowen's instructions, they created a pressure seal using materials from the emergency kit. A temporary solution, but one that might buy them crucial hours. "I've spent my entire career proving I belong in rooms full of men," Juliana said suddenly, her hands steady despite her fear. "And my solution was to become even more heartless than they were." Westfield glanced at her, surprised by the moment of self-awareness. "We all made choices about who we became." "She made choices too," Juliana replied, nodding toward where Elowen was visible through a hatchway, efficiently directing Thackeray and Rafferty on securing the upper deck equipment. But hers made her stronger, not smaller. By midnight, the worst of the storm had moved past them, though heavy rain and significant swells continued to challenge the damaged vessel. Elowen had managed to restore minimal power to essential systems, enough to run the pumps and navigation lights, but not enough to restart the engines. The group gathered in the main cabin, exhausted but alive, their designer clothes soaked and ruined, their carefully cultivated appearances long since surrendered to survival priorities. Elowen spread a nautical chart on the table, her movements precise despite her injury. "We're approximately 12 nautical miles from Penobscot Harbor," she explained, tracing their position with a caliber. "The storm has pushed us northeast, away from our planned course. The emergency beacon is functioning, but Coast Guard assistance will be limited until conditions improve further. So, we're still in danger," Brexley concluded, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "We're stabilized but vulnerable," Elowen corrected. "The hull breach is contained for now, but another large wave could change that quickly. We need to maintain pumping operations and keep the vessel balanced until help arrives or conditions allow for auxiliary power navigation." She assigned watch rotations, pairing each executive with specific responsibilities based on the capabilities they had demonstrated during the crisis. There were no objections, no assertions of privilege or complaints about tasks beneath their station. The hierarchy that had existed that morning had been completely inverted. As the others dispersed to their assigned duties, Thackeray remained behind with Elowen. "Your shoulder needs proper medical attention," he said, gesturing to where blood had soaked through her makeshift bandage. "The medical kit in my tactical craft has sufficient supplies," she replied. "I need someone with steady hands to assist with cleaning and closing the wound." Despite his fatigue, Thackeray straightened. "I can do that. My father insisted I take emergency medical training before he would let me captain the family yacht." In the small galley, illuminated by emergency lighting, Thackeray carefully followed Elowen's instructions to clean, disinfect, and dress her wound. The injury was significant. A reopened gash where shrapnel had previously been extracted, now compounded by a new laceration from the equipment case. "This is going to scar," he observed as he applied the adhesive sutures from her medical kit. "Just one more for the collection," she replied without self-pity, gesturing to the network of marks across her shoulder and back, evidence of a career spent in harm's way. "When did you join the Navy?" he asked, focusing on his task to avoid staring at the physical record of sacrifice written on her skin. 18. Grew up in coastal Maine. Father was a lobster man until a storm took him when I was 14. Mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Military was my ticket to college and something more. And they selected you for special operations?" A hint of pride crossed her face. "I selected it. Qualified for officer candidate school, excelled in aquatic and technical training. When they started the Women's Tactical Integration Program, I volunteered. How many made it through? Started with 28 women, 3 completed the course." Thackeray absorbed this as he finished securing the bandage. "Why didn't you just overpower us today? You clearly could have." Elowen met his gaze directly. "Because this wasn't a combat situation. It was an assessment. If I'd responded with force, you'd have learned nothing except that some people are physically stronger than you. And what were we supposed to learn instead? That character reveals itself in crisis," she said simply, "and that the people you dismiss might be the ones you end up depending on for survival." As dawn approached, Elowen made her way to the upper deck where Brexley had taken the final watch rotation. He stood at the rail, staring out at the gradually calming sea, his posture that of a man confronting uncomfortable truths. "Storm's passing," she, observed, joining him at the rail. Auxiliary power should be sufficient for navigation within the hour. He nodded without looking at her. My grandfather built his fortune with an actual skill, shipbuilding during World War II. My father doubled it through smart investments in emerging markets. And what have I done? Moved imaginary money between accounts while treating actual skilled people like props in my personal theater. Ilawan said nothing, allowing the moment to unfold without interference. I've never had to earn respect, he continued. I've just assumed it was included with the corner office and the investment portfolio. Respect is earned through actions, Ilawan finally said. It's never too late to change those actions. Before Brexley could respond, the radio crackled with an incoming transmission. Ilawan moved quickly to the communications panel, adjusting frequencies with practiced hands. Sovereign privilege, this is Coast Guard Cutter Resolute. Do you copy? Over. Ilawan pressed the transmission button. Resolute, this is Lieutenant Commander Travail aboard Sovereign Privilege. We copy you clearly. Over. Commander Travail, we received your emergency beacon signal. What is your status? Over. Vessel sustained storm damage, including partial hull breach, currently contained. 6 civilians aboard, no serious injuries. Limited auxiliary power, navigational systems intact. Requesting escort to Penobscot Harbor. Over. Confirmed, Commander. We have your position and are en route to your location. ETA 20 minutes. Resolute out. As Ilawan replaced the radio handset, she found all 6 executives had gathered behind her, their faces showing a mixture of relief and something deeper. A fundamental realization about themselves and the woman they had so grievously misjudged. Commander, Westfield said, using her title with genuine respect. I think I speak for everyone when I say we owe you our lives. And an apology, Juliana added, her usual polished veneer completely absent. What we did was unforgivable. Ilawan regarded them steadily. Apologies matter less than change behavior, she said. The real test of character isn't what you say when you're facing consequences, but what you do when those consequences are no longer immediate. The Coast Guard cutter appeared on the horizon, its approach swift and purposeful across the now calming seas. As it drew alongside the damaged yacht, the group could see a crew efficiently preparing to render assistance. An officer called across from the cutter's deck. Lieutenant Commander Travail, Captain Reynolds sends his regards, says you're making a habit of dramatic rescues. For the first time since her true identity had been revealed, Ilawan smiled slightly. Tell Captain Reynolds he still owes me for that extraction in Hormuz. The easy familiarity between professionals who had shared dangerous experiences was not lost on the executives. They watched as Ilawan, coordinated with the Coast Guard team, establishing tow lines and transfer protocols with practiced efficiency. As the cutter began escorting the damaged yacht back toward harbor, the Coast Guard captain himself crossed over to assess the situation. His greeting to Ilawan was formal but warm, a salute exchange between equals who shared mutual respect. Commander, when they said you were on rehabilitation assignment, I didn't expect to find you in the middle of the Atlantic during a Category 2 storm. Keeping my skills sharp, Captain, she replied with the hint of a smile. And these are the charter clients? He asked, eyeing the bedraggled executives with professional assessment. Yes, they've been instrumental in stabilizing the vessel during crisis conditions, Ilawan said, offering them a dignity they hadn't earned, but now might strive to deserve. The captain nodded, accepting her characterization without question. We'll have you back in harbor within 3 hours. The owner of Atlantic Elite Charters is waiting at the marina. Apparently, he was monitoring your emergency beacon all night. Commander Adair always did hate missing the action, Ilawan replied. As the captain returned to the cutter, Rafferty moved beside Ilawan. Why did you say that? About us helping? That's not how it happened. Ilawan watched the coastline gradually appearing on the horizon. Because what happens next matters more than what happened before. You have an opportunity now. Don't waste it. The morning sun strengthened as they approached Penobscot Harbor, illuminating the damage the yacht had sustained, torn sails, broken railings, missing equipment. But it remained afloat, its passengers alive because one person aboard had possessed the skills and character to ensure their survival. As they neared the harbor entrance, a small crowd became visible on the main dock. Locals gathered to witness the return of a vessel many had believed lost in the night's violent storm. Among them stood a tall figure with military bearing, watching their approach with focused intensity. "Commander Adair," Elowen identified him to the group. "My former commanding officer and the owner of Atlantic Elite Charters." He knew what would happen, Brexley realized. This whole thing was a setup from the beginning. "Not the storm," Elowen corrected. "But yes, the assessment was intentional. Your group's reputation preceded you." "So what happens now?" Thackeray asked. "Legal charges?" "That depends partly on you," Elowen replied as they approached the dock. "The decisions you make in the next few hours will determine whether yesterday was the worst mistake of your lives or the beginning of something better." The executives exchanged glances, the gravity of their situation and their remarkable second chance, settling over them as the harbor drew nearer and the consequences of their actions waited on the shore. Dawn broke over the Atlantic, with the fragile beauty that often follows violent storms. The wind had settled to a manageable breeze, though the swells remained significant. The Sovereign Privilege had survived the night, battered, waterlogged, but still afloat. Due entirely to the leadership of the woman its charterers had attempted to humiliate less than 24 hours earlier. Elowen stood at the helm, guiding the yacht on its slow return to harbor, using the auxiliary power she had managed to restore around midnight. Her wound was now properly dressed with supplies from the tactical craft's medical kit. Though the effort had clearly taken a toll, her face showed the strain of the all-night battle against the elements, yet her hands remained steady on the controls. The 6 executives presented a stark contrast to their previous day's appearance. Designer clothes were torn and salt-stained, perfectly styled hair hung in damp disarray, and expressions of entitled superiority had been replaced by the humbled look of people confronting their own insignificance against nature's power and their own moral failures. The Coast Guard cutter Resolute maintained position alongside them, its crew occasionally signaling course corrections as they approached the harbor entrance. With each passing minute, the reality of returning to civilization pressed more heavily upon the group. What had happened at sea would not stay at sea, not this time. As they navigated the final approach to the harbor, the damaged yacht drew considerable attention. Local fishing boats altered course for a closer look, their captains raising hands in salute when they recognized the Coast Guard escort. Onlookers gathered along the harbor wall, word having spread about the luxury vessel caught in the overnight storm. "There will be questions," Elowen said quietly to the group assembled behind her. "The Coast Guard requires incident reports for all maritime rescues. What you say in those reports is up to you." "Will you be filing charges?" Prescott asked, voicing the concern they all shared. "That depends on your actions now," she replied, her focus remaining on navigating the narrow channel. Commander Adair may have different opinions on the matter. The imposing figure of Commander Adair became clearer as they approached the main dock. Tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped silver hair, and the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to command. He stood slightly apart from the harbor staff and onlookers, his attention fixed solely on the incoming vessels. Docking the damaged yacht required coordinated effort from everyone aboard. Elowen gave clear, concise instructions that the executives followed without question, a complete reversal of the previous day's dynamic. When the final lines were secured and the gangway positioned, she turned to address the group one last time. "The Coast Guard will want statements from each of you regarding the incident. I suggest you be truthful. Attempting to throw someone overboard, miles from shore, could be classified as attempted manslaughter under maritime law. But that determination isn't mine to make." The gravity of potential legal consequences seemed to hit them for the first time, adding another layer of sobriety to already subdued expressions. "What would you do?" Juliana asked quietly. "If the decision were yours?" Elowen considered this for a moment. "In my experience, people who truly recognize the magnitude of their mistakes don't need additional punishment to change their behavior. Those who don't recognize it won't change regardless of consequences." As they prepared to disembark, Brexley finally asked the question that had been building since dawn. "Why did you take this assignment? You obviously knew what we were like from your friend's warning. Why put yourself in that position?" Elowen considered him for a moment before answering. "When I was recovering from my injuries, I had a lot of time to think about the different kinds of battles worth fighting. Some enemies wear uniforms and carry weapons. Others wear designer labels and carry prejudices that can be just as deadly in their own way. She gathered her go-bag and prepared to lead them ashore. Sometimes the most important victories aren't won with weapons, but with examples that challenge someone's worldview. As they walked down the gangway, Commander Adair approached, surveying both the damaged vessel and its passengers with a critical eye. "Looks like you had an eventful charter, Commander Travail," he said, his tone revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Educational for all involved," she replied evenly. Adair nodded, then addressed the group. "I trust my sailing instructor provided satisfactory service during your emergency situation?" There was a moment of uncomfortable silence before Thackeray stepped forward. "More than satisfactory. She saved our lives, our vessel, and our dignity, the last of which we didn't deserve." He straightened his shoulders before continuing. "I want to be clear about what happened. We behaved abominably and put Commander Travail in danger through our own arrogance and cruelty. Whatever legal or financial consequences result from that, we accept full responsibility." Juliana moved to stand beside him. "We owe her everything, and we've given her nothing but disrespect in return." Even Brexley, despite his instinct for self-preservation, nodded in agreement. "I've never been more wrong about a person in my life," he admitted, the words clearly unfamiliar to his tongue. Commander Adair's expression remained neutral, but he exchanged a brief glance with Elowen that suggested this outcome was not entirely unexpected. "I'll expect full written statements by tomorrow," he said finally. "In the meantime, I suggest you all get some rest. Near-death experiences have a way of causing delayed reactions." As the group dispersed toward waiting transportation, Elowen remained behind with her former commander. "Mission successful?" he asked once they were alone. "Too early to tell," she replied, watching the executives depart. "People make a lot of promises when they've just faced mortality. The real test is whether anything changes once they're back in their comfort zones." "And what about you?" Adair asked. "Ready to admit your rehabilitation period is over and return to active duty? The team misses your leadership." Elowen's hand unconsciously moved to her shoulder, where fresh blood had seeped through the bandage during docking. "Almost," she said thoughtfully. "I needed to prove something to myself first. That you could still perform under pressure? I'd say facing down a Category 2 storm in a damaged pleasure craft with 6 useless civilians qualifies. That I could still believe people can change," she corrected, "even the most entitled ones." The next morning found Elowen in the small office at Atlantic Elite Charters, reviewing the formal statements submitted by each of the executives. The accounts were remarkably forthright. No attempts to minimize their actions or deflect responsibility. Each described in detail their treatment of her, the decision to throw her overboard, and her subsequent rescue of both themselves and the vessel. Commander Adair entered with 2 mugs of coffee, placing one before her. "Coast Guard sent over their preliminary report. They are recommending commendations for your actions during the storm." "Not necessary," she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I was just doing my job." "Above and beyond, as usual?" He nodded toward the statements. "Any surprises there?" They were honest. That's something at least. "The question is what happens next. Atlantic Elite could press charges for endangerment of staff, reckless behavior at sea, damage to charter property." He leaned against the desk. "Or we could accept the substantial compensation they've offered and close the matter." Elowen raised an eyebrow. "Compensation?" Adair slid a document across to her. "Arrived by courier this morning, signed by all 6 of them." She scanned the paper, her expression shifting to surprise as she reached the proposed settlement figure. "This is excessive. Maybe, or maybe it's what accountability looks like when you have the resources to back it up." Adair took a sip of his coffee. "The interesting part is the conditions they've attached." Elowen turned the page to find additional provisions beyond the financial settlement. The executives proposed establishing a maritime safety foundation, focused on training and equipment for rescue operations. With Atlantic Elite Charters as a primary partner, they also committed to funding scholarships for veterans transitioning to maritime careers. "They've been busy," she observed. "Apparently near-death experiences and profound humiliation are effective motivators." He studied her for a moment. "The question is, do you believe it's genuine?" Before she could answer, the office door opened and the receptionist appeared. "Commander, there's someone here to see you. Says it's important." Brexley Harrington stood in the doorway, looking remarkably different from the arrogant financier of 2 days earlier. The expensive casual wear had been replaced by simple, practical clothing. The practiced charm was absent, replaced by something approaching genuine humility. "Commander Travail," he began, then hesitated. "I apologize for the interruption. I wanted to deliver this in person." He extended an envelope which Elowen accepted with measured caution. "It's not another offer," he clarified quickly. "It's an invitation. I've spoken with the directors of the Veterans Maritime Association. They're holding an event next month focused on career transitions for service members. They've asked if you would consider being the keynote speaker." Elowen looked up from the invitation with mild surprise. That was fast work. When you have my resources and suddenly discover a conscience, you can make things happen quickly. A flash of his old confidence appeared briefly, then modulated into something more thoughtful. "The truth is, I spent yesterday thinking about what you said regarding battles worth fighting. I've never fought for anything except my own advancement. I'd like to change that." Commander Adair excused himself, leaving Elowen alone with her former tormentor turned unexpected ally. "Why the maritime focus?" she asked, setting aside the invitation. "Because it's what I actually know something about, beyond finance. My grandfather really did build ships before he built his fortune. I grew up hearing stories about how the ocean doesn't care about your bank account or your pedigree." He smiled ruefully. "I just never internalized that lesson until recently." "Recently being when you were clinging to a rail in gale force winds?" "Something like that." He met her gaze directly. "I know you have every reason to doubt my sincerity, but I'm asking for the chance to prove that what happened out there changed something fundamental." Elowen studied him carefully, assessing not just his words, but the subtle indicators she'd been trained to notice. Micro-expressions, eye movement patterns, physical tells that revealed more than conscious communication. "Actions over time are the only real evidence of change," she finally said. "One day of good intentions doesn't erase a lifetime of entitlement." "I understand that," he replied, accepting the challenge implicit in her words. "I'm prepared to demonstrate commitment through consistent behavior. Then we'll see what that behavior reveals." She rose, extending her hand in a professional gesture that acknowledged his statement without either accepting or rejecting it. "Time will tell, Mr. Harrington. Please call me Brexley," he said, shaking her hand with noticeably less swagger than their first meeting. "Let's stick with Mr. Harrington for now," she replied with the hint of a smile. Familiarity is also earned. 3 months later, Elowen stood on the deck of a naval training vessel, overseeing a specialized exercise for her recently reassembled team. Her shoulder had fully healed, the medical restrictions lifted following her performance during what had officially been recorded as an unplanned training scenario during her rehabilitation assignment. The waters off the North Carolina coast presented ideal conditions for the maritime infiltration techniques they were practicing, skills that might someday mean the difference between mission success and failure in contested environments around the world. As her team executed a flawless extraction sequence from the target vessel, Elowen felt the familiar satisfaction of witnessing excellence born of discipline, preparation, and unwavering commitment. These were the values that had shaped her life, the standards by which she measured herself and others. A junior officer approached with a tablet displaying a news article. "Thought you might find this interesting, Commander." The headline read, "Wall Street Executive Launches Maritime Safety Foundation, Following Near-Death Experience." Below it was a photo of Brexley Harrington presenting a check to a veterans organization, specializing in ocean rescue training. The article detailed how the foundation had already funded improved emergency equipment for 3 coastal communities, and established a scholarship program for service members pursuing maritime careers. It quoted Harrington, acknowledging how a harrowing experience at sea had opened his eyes to the critical importance of proper training and respect for ocean conditions. Further down the page was a smaller item about Thackeray Whittington joining the board of directors for a nonprofit focused on making sailing accessible to underprivileged youth. The accompanying quote read, "There are profound lessons to be learned on the water about who we are and who we might become, lessons that shouldn't be limited to the privileged few." Elowen handed the tablet back with a small nod of acknowledgement. "Interesting indeed. Did you expect they'd actually change?" the officer asked. I've learned never to expect anything, Aloan replied, turning her attention back to the training exercise where her team moved with the synchronized precision that came from absolute mutual trust. But I've also learned never to underestimate the human capacity for transformation when faced with the right catalyst. Later that week, Aloan found herself back in Maine, standing at the harbor where the Sovereign Privilege had limped to safety months earlier. The yacht itself was gone, sold by the charter company, and replaced with a newer, more advanced vessel that incorporated state-of-the-art safety features. She had returned at Commander Adair's invitation to observe a demonstration of new rescue techniques being implemented by local Coast Guard units, with support from the recently established Maritime Safety Foundation. The irony that the foundation had been created by the very people who had once endangered her life was not lost on her. As she watched the precision maneuvers of the rescue boats, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. They've reduced potential recovery time by nearly 40% with the new equipment. Aloan turned to find Juliana Remington standing nearby, clipboard in hand, her designer outfit replaced by practical maritime gear bearing the Foundation's logo. Ms. Remington, Aloan acknowledged with mild surprise. I didn't expect to see you here. Juliana, please, she replied. And I've been here every week for the past 2 months. The Foundation needed someone detail-oriented to coordinate with equipment manufacturers and training staff. And that someone is you? Turns out organizing complex operations is something I'm actually good at, when it's for a purpose beyond impressing my colleagues. She gestured toward the harbor where the demonstration continued. I never properly thanked you, by the way. Not just for saving our lives, but for showing me what actual strength looks like. No thanks necessary, Aloan replied. You did the hard part yourself. What part is that? Choosing to change. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Commander Adair, accompanied by several Coast Guard officers and a familiar tall figure, Thackeray Whittington, whose bearing had somehow become both more confident and less arrogant in the intervening months. Commander Travail, Thackeray greeted her with genuine respect. The Maritime Youth Program you recommended is exceeding all expectations. We have 35 students enrolled, over half from low-income backgrounds. Good to hear, she replied. How are they progressing? Remarkably well. Their instructor says several show particular aptitude for navigation and emergency procedures. His expression turned reflective. It's humbling to watch 14-year-olds master skills that I pretended to know, despite years of expensive sailing lessons. Commander Adair joined the conversation. The Coast Guard's implementing some of the Foundation's recommended protocols for civilian rescue operations. Apparently, they're finding value in approaches developed by someone with both military and civilian maritime experience. The implied acknowledgement of Aloan's unique contribution to both worlds was not lost on anyone present. As the afternoon progressed, Aloan found herself in the unexpected position of acting as informal advisor to the very people who had once dismissed her expertise. The transformation in their attitudes was evident not just in their words, but in their actions. The careful attention they paid to technical details, the respect they showed to the Coast Guard personnel, regardless of rank, the genuine commitment to learning rather than performing knowledge. At day's end, as they gathered in Commander Adair's office to review the demonstration results, Brexley Harrington made an unexpected appearance. He entered with none of his former swagger, instead carrying himself with the measured confidence of someone engaged in meaningful work. Commander Travail, he acknowledged her with a nod before addressing the group. I've just come from a meeting with the harbor master. The City Council has approved our proposal for advanced training facilities to be constructed adjacent to the Coast Guard station. That's excellent news, Thackeray replied. The simulation equipment will make a tremendous difference in preparation for extreme conditions. Speaking of which, Brexley continued, turning to Aloan, we've incorporated several of your tactical communication protocols into the civilian emergency response system. The Coast Guard reports a significant improvement in coordination efficiency during multi-vessel operations. Glad to hear they're proving useful, she replied. More than useful, they're saving lives. He hesitated, then added, lives that might have been lost if we hadn't learned what we did that night. The room fell silent as everyone present reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment, how the worst of human behavior had somehow catalyzed positive change through the intervention of someone who had every reason to seek punishment rather than transformation. As the meeting concluded and people began to disperse, Rafferty, who had remained quieter than his colleagues, approached Elowen. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said. "That night in the storm, when you pushed Brexley out of the way of the equipment case, you knew exactly what was happening, didn't you? Your situational awareness is too good to have been caught by surprise." Elowen regarded him thoughtfully. "What's your question, Mr. Rafferty?" "You chose to take that hit, knowing it would reopen your wound. You could have saved yourself and him. Why make that choice?" She considered her answer carefully. "Because sometimes the most powerful lesson isn't telling people who they are, but showing them who they could be." 1 year to the day, after being thrown overboard from the sovereign privilege, Elowen stood on the deck of a naval vessel in the Persian Gulf, back in her element as team leader for a classified operation. Her rehabilitation was long complete, her capabilities fully restored, her command presence as natural as breathing. In the ship's communication center, she received a secure message from Commander Adair. Attached was a newspaper article about the Maritime Safety Foundation's first anniversary. The foundation had expanded to 3 coastal regions, equipped 17 rescue vessels with advanced technology, and trained over 200 civilian emergency responders in military-grade rescue techniques. The article quoted Brexley Harrington. "Sometimes it takes nearly drowning to learn how to save others. This foundation exists because someone who had every reason to let us sink chose instead to show us how to swim." Elowen closed the message and returned to the mission planning room where her team awaited her guidance. The ocean outside the vessel was the same one that had nearly claimed the lives of 6 entitled executives a year earlier. The same powerful, unforgiving force that she had mastered through years of discipline and training. The water had never been her enemy. It had always been her most honest teacher, revealing true character when all pretense was stripped away by necessity. In the crucible of crisis, both she and the executives had discovered unexpected truths about themselves. She, that her capacity to believe in human transformation remained intact despite her combat experiences. They, that their wealth and status meant nothing when facing the fundamental forces of nature. As she briefed her team on the upcoming mission parameters, Elowen moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her way back to where she belonged, the sea that had shaped her, tested her, and ultimately revealed her true character to those who had mistaken her silence for weakness. The lessons of that storm-tossed night continued to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond those directly involved, proof that sometimes the most profound victories come not from defeating enemies, but from transforming them through example and opportunity, rather than punishment and retribution. For the executives who had once mocked her, the ocean had become not a playground for their privilege, but a humbling teacher of their own limitations and potential. For Elowen, it remained what it had always been, the element where her true strength could be fully expressed, a constantly shifting battlefield that demanded respect from all who ventured onto its surface, regardless of their wealth, status, or background. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Share your experience in the comments below and subscribe to see more stories that remind us to look deeper.